So hello, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires Town Hall with the Berkshire Delegation. I want to extend our appreciation to the Berkshire Delegation for making time for us, as you always do for this important sector in the Berkshires. My name is Stephanie Bosley, and I am a board member of the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires, and I also work in the nonprofit sector at Berkshire Community Action Council. I will be your co-moderator this afternoon, along with Ilene Marcus, whom I will introduce in a minute. I also want to mention that the incredible staff of the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires, Liana Toscanini and Elizabeth Stone, are here with us today. They'll say hello in the chat box, and we have many of our board members that are joining us today. And I also want to give a special welcome to our Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires members that are with us today. So given the COVID-19 outbreak and the reopening measures, the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires felt it was important to host a town hall to hear from the delegation with three objectives: to have an open dialogue informed by the questions that you, the executive directors and senior managers of nonprofits, wanted to hear answered, to share important information to our members, specifically around the reopening efforts, and to look at next steps that we can make together to make this sector strong. So now I'll introduce a group that really needs no introduction. We have Senator Adam Hinds with us today. He's our state senator in the Berkshires, who represents the 52 Western Massachusetts communities. We have Representative Smitty Pignatelli of the 4th Berkshire District and the Dean of the Berkshire Delegation. We have Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier of the 3rd Berkshire District, representing Pittsfield. We have Representative Paul Mark of the 2nd Berkshire District, representing cities and towns throughout Berkshire and Franklin County. And we have Representative John Barrett III, representing the 1st Berkshire District. Now, I would like to introduce Ilene Marcus, a fellow board member of the NPC. And I am so fortunate to have Ilene co-moderating today with her wealth of experience in the public sector. We brought Ilene on today because one piece of feedback that we received from our last town hall was that people were hoping that we could answer questions from the chat. So Ilene will serve as our chat room guru today, posing questions that you are sending our way. So Ilene, welcome, and thank you so much for co-moderating with me today.
Pleasure to be here to represent the NPC. You know, this is a very important group we have, because not only do we make up 25% of the workforce, but between the clients we see and the customers we see and the culturals, the nonprofits really have their pulse on what's happening on the front line. And this is a two-way street that needs to happen between our representatives and our electeds to know what's going on, and for us to know what we need to be doing. So that is really the purpose of today, to get some real-time information and to set expectations about reopening and what's going to happen. I just want to give you a quick overview of the ground rules. If you haven't done so already, please add your name and organization name to your little name on your box. You can also look at participants so you can see everyone who's on. Given the feedback from our first town hall, this is 75 minutes. We really want to get into dialogue. Please keep yourself on mute. I will be manning the chat, womaning the chat. So if you have any questions, please let me know. We got over 62 questions before, and we have grouped them into 7 categories. Stephanie is going to start with the 7 categories, and I'm going to then intersperse with questions from the chat box. Here are the categories. 1, we want a simple understanding of the stripped down phases of opening. 2, reopening and safety concerns. 3, special cultural considerations. 4, special human service and educational organizational considerations. 5, workforce issues. That includes broadband for those of you that love to talk about broadband. 6, overall economic impact. And 7, enforcement. We got a lot of questions about enforcement moving forward. So please adhere to the principles of civil discourse with appropriate language and comments, both in the chat, and keep on writing in the chat, and everybody just put in one word about your expectations for today so we know what you would like to see going forward. And with that, back to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilene. So let's get into it. You know, everyone had so many questions about reopening. And there's been so much information coming our way. So Senator Hinds, I'll start with you. Is there an estimated time frame for each phase, and is there more information on what each phase entails?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. I'm heartened by the fact that we're all kind of coming together here the weekend before the reopening to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, make sure we're kind of serving the community as best we can. All of my answers are going to be somewhat kind of with a big disclaimer that the plan is still being developed as we speak. And so there have been conversations back and forth. I'm one of 2 legislative observers on the governor's reopening advisory board. And so I get access to some information, but not all of it. And so I can say the following: what do we expect to see Monday? If you've been following the governor's press conferences, he's been clear that this is, first, there's going to be the medical criteria set out in terms of testing and positive responses and hospitalizations and the like, and capacity. And then we'll move into the phase approach. And so, to be clear, there's been the industries and companies that will be in that first phase include those that are low risk and high economic impact. And so we'll see that there's been a mixture of probably office space and construction and manufacturing, and we're seeing a lot of conversation around some personal services by appointment. Is there the timing between the phases? By the way, I want to make clear that a real key part of this is another piece of the reopening plan, which will be very clear protocols for how those workplaces are conducted, i.e., is it the PPE that's required, the distancing, the cleanliness and hygiene, and then going into more detail by sector. So you might have some sectors where there's a recommendation for changing the shifts so that there's fewer people. That applies probably more relevantly in the Boston area, where we're trying to also manage who's on the public transportation at any one time. So there's a range of considerations. I've heard both. It'll be 1 week until the next phase, and I've heard there will be a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks between each phase. And the distance is important because there's sometimes a lag in testing and cases showing up in a hospital based on what is, once you start to loosen some of these measures. And so if I were to answer right now, I had a gun to my head, I would say we'd have an opening and then a second phase a week later, and then the third phase would be dictated by more of the medical criteria. You'll remember there's been 4 phases highlighted. You have the start, you have a cautious, you have a vigilant, and then the new normal, which would probably take place once there's a vaccine or therapy in place. So that's a short, unfortunately, slightly vague answer.
Thank you. And Rep. Farley-Bouvier, I saw that you would like to also chime in.
So you didn't have to hear my dog barking. So, it's come up, give a word of what you're looking for today, what you're thinking about today. And I guess if I had a word for today or for this week, it would be frustrated. I have been generally very supportive of the administration and how they have handled this crisis. They have done a tremendous amount of work, and I think that Massachusetts has done a good job in flattening this curve. But I have to say, and I'm ready to say today, that I'm not supportive when it comes to how they're communicating the reopening. The reopening plan could be an excellent plan, well thought out, well researched. The plan doesn't do us any good if it's not communicated well. Now, we put that, of course, it's easy for us in the Berkshires to contrast it with what's happening in New York. The governor, Governor Cuomo put out a plan. It is county-based, which I personally think is a good idea. Not only because it supports the data on the ground, but then when it comes to enforcing it and responding and going to the next steps in smaller groups, I think is a better idea. But also, he put out the plan 2 weeks before it starts. And so this idea that the governor is going to be putting out a plan next Monday, when we have businesses that are already telling their customers they are opening on Monday morning. I'm very, very concerned. So what can I say to you all that are trying to figure out what to do in your own universes? Think about what the principles are so that you can say, okay, is my business one that has no public interface? Because that's certainly the message that we're given. If that is the case, then I might be able to reopen sooner. But I only can do that if I have very clear procedures in place to protect my employees. But this idea that everybody thinks they're gonna, or some people, this person over here, this person over here can open on Monday, that's wrong. And I'm really worried that we're gonna be unleashing chaos. And you know what, then I think to myself, well, let the rest of the state be in chaos, but maybe here in the Berkshires, we can have a whole bunch of responsible people who are gonna do the right thing, and we're gonna try to lessen the chaos. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. So there were a lot of questions about, reopening concerns, safety concerns. Rep Pignatelli, I'll pose this question to you. Is there enough testing available so that we don't see a spike of COVID-19 cases? And do you know what testing protocols will look like once we begin reopening?
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you for the Leon and her team for pulling this all together. And thank everybody for joining us today. I think we all enjoyed our conversation last week, and if I could just briefly echo the sentiment of Tricia. I'm extremely disappointed in the administration with the lack of information that's come forward. The Berkshires have not only flattened the curve, we've obliterated the whole chart. As we speak this morning, there are 3 people at Berkshire Medical Center with COVID-19. Not one of them is in ICU. So I think we've done a very good job, and that's a trend that we've seen over the last 3 weeks. But we have to keep in mind, 127,000 people in the Berkshire, they have tested less than 4,000 people. So that's not a real big number. So I think those testing protocols and what the governor announced yesterday about the drive-through CVS testing situations. Again, frustrated that no CVS in Berkshire County is doing that. I mean, I think we're kind of the redheaded stepchild of this whole conversation, which is frustrating to me. So what testing looks like in the future, I don't know. I do agree with Tricia that I think we will be responsible. The one thing that I think would be more detrimental to all of the agencies on this call right now, and the Berkshires in general, is this: if we don't take this thing seriously, if we see a resurgence of this virus, if we see a spike, and statewide, we actually had more deaths yesterday than we did the day before. So we actually saw a little spike just in the last 2 days statewide. So we have to be very careful, because I think the worst thing that could happen would be to open up prematurely, and then 3 weeks from now, we saw a spike in the Berkshires and they clamped down again. That could be more devastating. I'm kind of glad this has happened in March and April, which tend to be our slow season anyways. This is now the start of our season. Let's not jeopardize that. But to echo again, we are not opening on Monday. That is so important to get out there, because so many people say, we're ready to open on Monday. Well, your sector may not be available or able to open on Monday. So don't think for a minute that you can. The lack of information from the administration, I think, has been very disheartening, almost disingenuous to the businesses of the Berkshires. In about an hour and a half, we're going to hear what Tanglewood has decided to do. And I think that's going to send ripples through everybody on this call right now. I talked to them this morning, and just tune in at 1 o'clock and see what they've decided to do. So we all have to take this thing seriously. It's going to be a long run. I think large gatherings will be way down the line. But our governor, and I'll just wrap up with this, our governor seems to be driven by data. He likes to see 14 days of numbers going down. That is a good barometer. The Berkshires have, beyond 14 days, done a very good job, so we can't afford a spike. So the time between phases, is it going to be 2 weeks? Is it going to be 3 weeks? I don't know. I don't know. And I don't think anybody does know, but I think he does owe it to all of us I wish he would announce today, Friday, that on Tuesday morning, these are the businesses that can open. And therefore I could get my staff mobilized. I could do a deep cleaning of my business. I could understand the protocols that I need. I could get the protective equipment that you're telling me I need to have. But to say that on Monday afternoon, that you can open tomorrow morning and you're ill prepared for it, I think is really wrong on the governor's part. So I think you sense my frustration, but we have to be prepared. We have to be smart. We have to use common sense, and we have to be Berkshire.
Thank you, Smitty.
I gotta put that in there.
And you have to. And I did see in the chat that someone asked where they can tune in to hear Tanglewood's announcement.
I think they're just doing a press release. So it'll be online, I'm sure, local newspapers later today.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Ilene, because she said that there's been some questions that have been coming through the chat.
So one was Tanglewood. The other about reopening safety is, will we get CVS testing in our area? Do we know that any of our CVSs slated to have that? Does anybody know?
I'd like to respond to that. So, you know, of course, when you listen and there's CVS is opening all over, you know, and then we're left out, my first response was, what the heck? But I actually hope we don't have the CVS sites, or I don't think it's necessary. Those tests, the tests that they're using are not as reliable as what is happening with Berkshire Medical Center. So I would prefer for us to support Berkshire Medical Center to get testing all over the county, and for us to open up even further the protocol for who can get tested, than for us to be relying on, quite frankly, big pharma, big corporate testing that has, you're going to hear more and more in the news how unreliable some of this testing is. So that's not a path that I'm going to spend any time on. I'd much rather support Berkshire Medical Center.
I could just quickly add, I think that's really important, that, you know, the minute clinics and the 5-minute tests, I mean, the success rate of those percentage-wise is very low. And I think it would send a really wrong message, providing us comfort that, hey, I tested negative. Well, you had about a 50-50 chance of being tested positive anyway. So it gives people false hope that everything is good here. I'd rather depend on the testing that goes with, you know, the volunteers in medicine. Give them testing. Berkshire Medical Center, give them proper testing. I feel much more comfortable with a professional tester than a drive-through drugstore.
Can I just jump into, if possible, here? I've been all over this testing issue now for several weeks. What happened at the nursing home in Williamstown, and the lack of understanding at that time by the state. They've changed their protocol since then a little bit, but I can agree with what my colleagues have said here. The reliability factor is around 65% if you go to a CVS to get tested. And I'll give you a classic example. They went through, even with people knowing what they're doing, they went through a nursing home here in Berkshire County, and they found only 2 residents that tested positive. But then they tested the staff and there was no positives, which means that obviously something had to be wrong because they had been shut down. So they retested the 2 patients after they left and were moved out of that nursing home. They tested them and found them to be negative. And so the reliability of these tests are shaky at best, even with the ones that know what they're doing on it and do it on a full-time basis. And the other thing that has to be understood, they have cranked up testing in the state, and I guess the governor's hopes is that he'll be able to do 75,000 a day by September. I think that was the month. But the
end of the year.
Am I back? Am I all right?
Yep.
But anyways, the testing is so important to this. The other thing too is why it's important too. Smitty mentioned Tanglewood. Well, let's talk about Williams College. Let's talk about MCLA. If there's not sufficient testing done up here, we're going to have to crank it up. In northern Berkshire right now, there are 60 EMS people that ambulance drivers and so on and so forth that have not been tested yet, and that's a sin. And that's happening here. So the testing isn't as great as what they're saying. It's got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just wrap out on the testing point, there's an important dynamic here that, you know, part of it is the positive. We should probably let Leah answer the testing questions, but Berkshires have been around 2% positive. So of all the tests that are done, 2% testing positive, and the state is around 15%. Typically when a country is considered to have gotten on top of this, it's in that 1 to 3% range. And so the answer is different depending on if you're talking about the Berkshires or Massachusetts in terms of do we have enough testing and the like. It speaks to the need to have more than the 4,000 tested in Berkshire County, because presumably that percentage could go up. I mean, the more you test, in theory, you're going to find more and more positives, right? And so the challenge has been, what do we get to? Right now, we're only testing something like 12,000, 13,000 a day in Massachusetts. To John's point, we're hoping to get to 45 by July and 75 by the end of the year. Why is that important? If we wanted not even universal, but kind of aggressive testing, we would be doing 100,000 a day in Massachusetts. The problem is it's pretty damn expensive. And the capacity to maintain that rate is incredibly difficult. Just turn on the national news and you can see that each of the component parts of that testing process are difficult to achieve, and everyone's in competition to achieve them. And so the layering with the other protocols that you're taking become that much more important. So therefore the masks, the distancing, and everything else is how you kind of stay ahead of this until we get to that point of having a vaccine or further treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do have some medical professionals from nonprofit organizations in the Berkshires. So if you have any information to add to this conversation, please head over to the chat and we welcome you to do so. So we've gotten quite a few questions from our cultural organizations in the Berkshires. We have many, and they're all concerned about when they can open their doors, when they can begin having performances and inviting people to their galleries. And this was one question that we got from Nick from Berkshire Theater Group. He was wondering, for the several performing art organizations in the Berkshires, can we anticipate some flexibility for events that can be presented outdoors, perhaps under a tent, with appropriate social distancing being employed? And I'm going to throw it over to Representative Mark.
Hello, thanks for having me from my technologically limited region of the Berkshires. I mean, the whole plan that we're hearing from the governor and from the members of this reopening advisory board, it's really about what can be done safely. Can you prove as a business or as an entity that you can keep people at an appropriate distance, that you can allow them to access equipment safely, that you can conduct whatever your business or your performance is without violating what we now know are the basic standards to keep people away from each other and keep people in a safe environment. And so if you have an outdoor performance, I mean, it seems likely to me that you're going to be more likely to get a green light than someone that is stuck with a theater inside. But I mean, we can't speak to it yet because as my colleagues have been mentioning, the information has been very slow to come out. And while we've been seeing this basic structure in the 4-phase plan, we haven't been given a lot of details. And I think Smitty said it. Yeah, I would really like to see something by today at the latest, not Monday afternoon telling us what's going to happen by the end of the day on the 18th, because it'll allow everybody to try to prepare better.
Thank you. And, kind of going off of that, will there be opportunity for organizations or businesses to submit a plan where, maybe right now they don't have the capacity to offer something outdoors or offer something socially distant, but in the coming weeks or months, they may be able to change their business model to follow these guidelines? Will there be opportunity for that? Senator Hinds, do you have there been any conversations about that thus far?
So I got some really good news here. Today, I was able to nominate Jonathan Butler to be on a subcommittee of the advisory board, focus on tourism, restaurants, and accommodations. And so they had their first meeting this morning at 8 a.m. And they're going to be putting out the plan for, or at least the guidances along these lines. So I know he would actually want to hear from you, and he may even set up opportunities to try to do that directly in the coming days and weeks. Really, probably days. It's not going to come out the same time as Monday, but they will set out some of those parameters. It was in recognition that the economies are different in the Commonwealth, and so One Berkshire and the Cape Cod Chamber both presented to the advisory board and said, look, we have a real seasonality to our economy, and we need to, if we miss this opportunity, it'll have significant ramifications for the region for the year to come. And so they took that on board, and so there will be a separate set of recommendations for tourism-based economies, and then this group will also help with the restaurants. So I wouldn't expect them in the first phase translation there. And there's also an outdoor recreation subcommittee, and they've been, the first announcements will include something in that area. I don't know what it will be, but it will be a recognition that there is the ability in certain industries to distance effectively and to keep folks safe by the nature of what they are. So I would say from a tourism perspective, from the culturals, drawing that distinction of when you can differentiate. It's not only outdoors, it's also indoors. I mean, Joe Thompson's been incredibly vocal about the fact that given the scope of Mass MoCA, you can time entrances, you can keep the distance, you can keep cleanliness. There's a real way to achieve that in a lot of our.
Can I just jump in on this question again? Only that what I'm bothered by about, and it happened in North Adams to the mayor last night. He goes into and he's absolutely right on this crane issue. I want to make that clear that I'm with him all the way. But he went into his own health board last night, and they debated. They couldn't even come up with a vote to support his effort to go down there and basically say to crane, it's not safe down there. Now, the same thing is going to happen in individual communities across Berkshire County. If there aren't specific guidelines from the state of Massachusetts, from the governor, from the Department of Public Safety, whatever, that sets up guidelines, I believe that if everybody's treated fairly in this thing, they're going to set up guidelines so that you can tell if you go to Berkshire Theater Festival, if you go to Mass MoCA, if you go into Tanglewood, how you can open up and what you have to be. They should be out there providing this assistance to every area of Massachusetts, whether it be on Cape Cod, whether it be in the Berkshires or someplace else, and meeting with these people and say, this is what's acceptable for your position. They're hiring people all over the place for tracers and things like that. That's good. Hire a lot of people all over so they can go all over the place and start working with the cultural institutions out here and saying, this is what you need. And they just have to spend a week out here in Berkshire County and hit every one of them so they know what's going on. That's the frustration I'm feeling. And I'm going to tell you, they came out with some unemployment figures yesterday in Berkshire County and throughout the state. And it's, North Adams is almost 31%, but even Lenox is almost 25%. Pittsfield is up around 30%. Williamstown, 28%. You say, how can it be in those communities? Well, you got Williams College there, which is a large employer. You've got all your cultural institutions. That's what's happening. But we need guidance from the state of Massachusetts. And Adam, you go back and tell that committee you sit on or whatever, that that's what we need. Because if not, these cultural institutions up here are not going to open, because you're going to get one bad Board of Health member who's mad at somebody who works at someplace is going to say no, and I'm going to block it. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions in the chat about this. What exactly is the hierarchy? Who do we get the green light from to go okay and the rules? Can anyone answer that?
I
wanted to talk about it because people were asking it in response to what I said, but then I like what Rep. Barrett just said, and I agree with him. What we've received so far throughout this process has been, a hodgepodge of ideas, and it's not effective. It needs to be something that comes from the governor or from the statewide Department of Public Health, because if you leave this up to, which he tried to do this at first, and he did it with the mask order at first, if you leave it up to each little community, the response you get in Pittsfield or North Adams, which are cities and have full-time staff, is going to be very different than the response you get from a town in Peru, where the Board of Health on a good week meets for 4 hours once a week. So I agree with what Rep. Barrett just said. This needs to come from the state level, recognizing that different regions have different concerns, but also recognizing that we don't have the same resources available in our small towns. And if the green light is given by whoever for just Berkshire County, and all of a sudden we are the one place that everyone in New York State and all of Massachusetts can go to, we might find ourselves overwhelmed very quickly by things we don't want to be. And so all the work we've put into fighting this thing and flattening the curve here in the Berkshires, could end up being really for nothing. And we don't want that to happen either.
Stephanie, if I could just jump in quick, I can't agree more with what was been previously said. We need clear, decisive action from the administration, which we haven't gotten yet anywhere along the line here. They've all been suggestions, recommendations, advisories. We've seen the city of Pittsfield shut down a business only to be overturned by the administration. So you want to empower the municipalities, but yet you don't back them up. Paul Mark is absolutely right. The little town of Peru should have the same rule book as the city of Pittsfield, not subject to interpretation. On outdoor festivals or activities, I spoke to someone in my district this morning about an outdoor festival. Even with proper social distancing and guidelines, their insurance company said you can't do it. The insurance company, your actual insurance company, put restrictions on them where it made it impossible for them to do what they wanted to do. They were going to limit the number of people. They had liability issues about public bathrooms. So I would encourage all of you, if you want to think about an outdoor festival or concert or whatever, check with your liability insurance company. They may be driving this agenda because they don't have any decisive knowledge or information from the administration. So I hope it's more decisive and not suggestions.
And I think here's a classic example too. You look at a Hancock Shaker Village, they have a very short window of opportunity when the animals are born in the spring and you want to get everybody in there. What do they do? How are they classified even? Are they a farm? Are they, an outdoor recreational? Are they agricultural? But somebody should be there from the state of Massachusetts basically saying, hey, this is what you've got to do. And they should assign people here in Berkshire County, Franklin County, Hampden County, whatever it may be. And that's the frustration we share. And I'll tell you, it's great that they're putting all these business people on these panels. But I'll tell you right now, they're not going to advocate the way the reps could have or the senator could advocate for you. But you know what? We're sort of like, the people that have been shoved to the background, and you're coming to us and asking us questions, but they won't put us at the table. And that's a real problem too.
Yeah.
So if I could just add in here that you're here, what you kind of wanted when you came was for your questions to be answered and for your frustrations to be lessened. And instead you have found the same level or maybe more frustration from your delegation. I'm going to be honest with you. It takes a lot for me to get frustrated. I do sort of known for my patience, and I'm kind of out of patience right now when it comes to this particular thing. So, but how can we be solution-based? I think Smitty brought up a really good point about your liability insurance. So that is an excellent thing for each organization to check with. The other thing I encourage people to do is to be proactively in touch with your local boards of health, your local health officials, so that when you're putting together your plans, and it should be a plan and not just like, okay, we're just going to do it. When you're putting together your plans, be in touch proactively. So our boards of health aren't playing whack-a-mole, right? So when Pittsfield closed down that business, they spent days making sure they had every T crossed and every I dotted. It takes a long time to do this enforcement. And then it was overturned by the administration. It was terrible. And so let's not put our local officials into that position. If if whatever we can do as individuals and as leaders of organizations to be responsible and thoughtful and working together, sharing best practices, the smoother it's going to go for our own organizations and for our community as a whole.
The next area that we have to move to is human service and education concerns. So just like you heard about the culturals that have a certain window of opportunity, we have the same type of questions based on grant funding, based on meeting deliverables in both the human services, the education, and the religious institutions. So I don't know if you want to drill down into a different question, Stephanie, or that is wide enough for someone to answer, or too wide.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we did have some, questions specifically around schools reopening. I know that Rep Barrett had talked about the colleges in the Berkshires, but yeah, I think in the broad term would be great.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm on the side of the scientists on all of this. I am very concerned. And I think that what schools like Williams are looking at is the decision, are they going to open up now? Are they going to open up in September rather, and then worry about getting people back if it flares up in the fall, like everybody's predicting except the White House, that there's going to be a flare up possibly in the fall if we don't get things under control. So I don't believe right now a decision can be made on the schools, regular schools within the communities, perhaps until the 1st of August. And that's probably pushing. But in the meantime, they should be making plans as to what their school year may look like, or at least through the fall, as to what's going on. I don't see a lot of that out there. And I again, I go back to the state of Massachusetts. Where's the guidance coming from the Commissioner of Education as to how these schools can open or not open, whatever the case may be? We need guidance. And just like the governors are saying, we need guidance from the White House, or we need it from Washington, and we need this. Now it ripples down to the communities themselves. We have to start needing guidance. But I do know Williams is going to make the decision on July 1st, one way or the other, and I think it's going to be based on it. But remember too how important that is to the Northern Berkshire economy here. There's 900 people that work at Williams College. They're certainly not going to need the food service people. They're not going to need the maintenance staff. That's where the bulk of these people work. And we're going to see a real problem with the economic part of things too, if that doesn't happen. So that's where it's at.
Just to add on the college front, Greenfield Community College, which is in my district, they're one of the first. They've already announced they're going all online in the fall. There will be no on campus for the rest of this year. And community colleges might be the first to be able to do that because they don't have residential, they don't have dorms. So it makes that decision a little bit easier for them. But yeah, like Rep Barrett's saying, and Greenfield's another area where there's not a lot of economic activity happening. The people that aren't going to be needed to maintain the on-campus activities, they're already looking at furloughs and layoffs, and it's not good.
And then Stephanie, if I could just quickly add, I share the sentiments about the community colleges and the four-year institutions. I think it could be devastating. I share equal concerns about K through 12. Our ability, we're blessed in the Berkshires. We have small schools and small school sizes, but how do we safely get our kids back K through 12 in September? Representative Barrett's a former school teacher. I come from a family of teachers. We always worry about the summer slide in between 4th and 5th or 7th and 8th grade. Well, we have had a spring and summer slide if we're not careful. So I would love to know, and I mentioned this to President Kennedy at BCC yesterday. I think there's an opportunity for the community colleges to get more engaged with our public school system to help those incoming juniors this fall, maybe do some dual enrollment online, get them taking college courses while they're still in high school, earning college credits and saving families money. I think we got to get real creative, and I think we have to get far more serious across the county with online learning in our K through 12 system to avoid that summer slide, and like I say, spring and summer slide. I've even thrown out the idea that, if and when school does get back this fall, and I say that if and when, maybe the first 6 weeks are a recap or a catch up from your previous grade. And maybe you transition from 4th to 5th or 7th, 8th, whatever you are, on November 1st for the rest of the year. If you're struggling or falling behind or reading improficiently in 3rd grade, well, 4th grade gets even harder, but you've already missed the last 3 or 4 months of 3rd grade. It's going to make that problem even worse. So I think school superintendents and the county have to get more serious about online learning, whether or not we go back to school. This is a real important factor. I talked to my niece the other day, who is a junior, and I asked her about online learning. There's one teacher that she has a class with that's doing nothing. She has 2 little kids who are not in school, and she lives in a town with no broadband. So she does not have the ability, like Representative Mark, God bless him, to hop in his car and drive down to the library to do a Zoom call with a nonprofit center. I think it's very problematic still in the Berkshires, and we need to recognize that. But we have to get more serious about the final results.
And if I could also address this, and I see that Aaron has put in the chat about childcare. So on those 2 topics, school systems and Berkshire County school system districts are good at talking to each other. They, as a group, shut down before the governor asked for a shutdown, by the way. So I think that they are talking to each other and are in touch with the working group around education at the state level. But there was a study released yesterday that, we talk about summer slide, as Smitty mentioned, and there's, somewhere between 15 and 25%, of a summer slide when it comes to information. They're talking about a 70% COVID slide. I mean, as Smitty said, that's a whole grade, right? I mean, how do you make that up? And then importantly, the divide is just, a gulf right now of who has access to education and who doesn't have access to education. It has to do with broadband. It has to do with households who, even if you're a household and you have a desktop, and you think you're doing pretty well, but now 3 kids and 2 parents are supposed to share that? What are you talking about? And then you're supposed to have a quiet space. I mean, the whole AP exam is a disaster right now, an absolute disaster. The kids can't take those exams, and then about 10% of them, there's a technical glitch in them and they can't upload them. I mean, it's coming from everywhere. But specifically talking about Pittsfield, I always support my colleagues when it comes to rural broadband because it's such a huge issue for these towns. But 10% of Pittsfield students do not have access to the internet. So Pittsfield, took on this huge task of making sure that every student has a Chromebook. They're almost done distributing all those. That was a big deal. The Chromebook, the charger, the power cord, all of those things. It was a really big undertaking for them to be able to do that, to find out that you can give them the device, but if you can't hook up to the internet, then what are you going to do? And that's in the big city of Pittsfield. So think about what's happening in these other towns. So I completely agree that if we're going to really do this right in any scenario, because I think the scenarios are going to be fluid in the fall, we need to get very, very serious about broadband. When it comes to childcare, childcare has to be a central part of the discussion on reopening, not an afterthought. And I think we have made some progress in getting that message across, but we have to be able to make sure that there's much clearer guidance around childcare. There's much more ability for people to access childcare. Right now, unless you're considered an essential worker, you can't get into the same childcare your kid's been in for years. If your child has been at Gladys Brigham, for example, for 5 years, you can't use that right now because you're not considered an essential worker. So there's great confusion out there. There's a lot of questions that have to get answered.
And if I could just quickly add to that, I think when we talk about a phased opening, why libraries are not in phase 1, libraries could be that classroom for those families that don't have broadband capabilities or don't have computers. That's an opportunity from an educational standpoint for students and families alike. I mean, there was a survey done in Lenox last year and a half ago with Lenox families where they felt most comfortable having their children. The Lenox Library was #1 over the Lenox Community Center. They are a hub. They were the identified hub for broadband when we launched this several years ago. So if you don't have the broadband in your house or don't have the ability to have it, the affordability, go to the local library and be able to engage in an online classroom with your classmates. So I think the advisory panel should seriously think about reopening of our libraries with conditions and restrictions, but still reopen them.
Right. I don't want to put more fuel on the fire, but in the chat box, there is also a lot of concerns about camp. Camp is a childcare solution during the summer when many parents who are working virtually will still have to work. And there is, as excuse the word, as annoying as it is, the long distance learning, there is nothing in the summer. I don't know if there's an answer to that, but just that it should be in our conscious thinking right now about summer is going to be even tougher on these parents.
Well, there really is an answer. It's going back to what I and others have already said. The state of Massachusetts, we would expect, would set up guidelines for camps, overnight camps, day camps, whatever it may be, travel to the camps, all those types of things. There should be a guidance from somebody, a Department of Public Health, anybody that would come out with guidance that's going to deal with this. And that's where the problem is. Each individual community, as Representative Mark says, you know, the part-time board that they have in Peru isn't going to take care of this. We have to push, maybe as a delegation or whatever. We need guidance from the state of Massachusetts, plain and simple. I mean, it's an easy solution if.
Yes.
And that's a big if.
Yeah. So in our workforce issues section, childcare was overwhelmingly the most questions that we got. And so Senator Hinds, I have in the committee, has there been discussion about what are families supposed to do that have been called to work in May, but their childcare is closed until July? Will they be eligible for the emergency childcare? Do you have any idea how many spots will be available? Has there been any discussion about cost for people who may have been laid off and now are being called back, so maybe they don't have the savings or the income that they once did to pay for their childcare? Any information that you could share about childcare overwhelmingly was our top question for workforce.
Yeah, so they're heading in the direction of having the protocols that you just that Representative Barrett was just asking for. So the group sizes and ratios, screening, staffing, isolation, hygiene, PPE requirements. And so that's one piece of it. The element that's deeply concerning, quite honestly, is I don't know if we have any childcare providers here. Once you start limiting the size in a room, and the business model is based on achieving a certain number of kids in the class or in the group, you're really starting to threaten the sustainability of the industry and a lot of programs. And so I'm putting that in the category of things that the legislature needs to immediately follow up on to kind of address. And so to be clear on what my role has been, we observe, two of us, and we're not allowed to contribute. And so we on side channels contribute to the co-chairs and ask for clarity, push for questions, et cetera. But we still haven't seen the actual plans. We still haven't been able to participate in even all of the board meetings. So if you think it's frustrating, my colleagues being here, imagine being told that you're able to observe and you can't even observe. So it's a real concern that the legislature, it's partly the effect of having an state of emergency, and in those situations, the legislature cedes a lot of power legally to the executive, and so that's a whole nother Zoom call for that. I'm not sure the question has been answered about reopening and getting the green light. The model they're pursuing, or it seems to be pursuing, is not that the state would certify if someone is ready to open. Instead, there was a discussion that would take too long. Even if you want to start on date certain, it would be 3 to 4 weeks before certifications were done. And so instead, it's kind of the back door, and you'll have everyone will open by industry, and then you basically publicly notify or recognize that you've followed those guidances. You put up your own certification, and then it's up to employees and customers and community members to raise concerns with local boards of health. And so, to Paul's point, and basically everybody, as a county, we have to be really conscious of the resources that our towns and boards of health are going to be saddled with, and trying to support as best we can, because that's the direction it's going to be going or coming from. And so it's a little bit of, in a way, backwards, but it kind of emphasizing opening up. Real quickly on the Wi-Fi, I mean, that's another one that we've all been working on to try to accelerate. It turns out it's not as easy as I think intellectually it sounds like it could be, i.e. can we throw more money at it? Can we have, I don't know how much you are all following it, but we have $10 million in CAF, federal funds coming towards 20 kind of municipal light plant towns. And it has to wait until every single one of them is ready before it's freed up. So we tried, can we just release it now and let the towns use this new cash? That hasn't worked from the federal level. And then, moreover, can we tell the utilities, it's usually them that are holding it up when we're in the construction phases we're entering and moving poles and to allow for new fiber. They used to try to accelerate it by clustering down a road, and now the utilities are saying, well, no, because of COVID, we can't actually cluster. And so COVID is kind of creating these bumps in the road for every obstacle that we're trying to confront. But this is, as to underscore your point, at precisely the moment that we're moving towards remote learning, at precisely the moment where the economy is shifting to remote working, and Berkshires could be poised to take advantage of that, and we just are not.
Right. And let's just couple that with the budget conversation. You know, you talked about there's money available. What is happening with line items and the budgeting process? And obviously all the things we're talking about, increased social distancing, all take money, especially for human service agencies that have to see less clients and all of those things. So who wants to address that topic, the budgeting process? And
I'll just jump in to begin with, but and the others certainly can too. I think the way that we've been told is that they're going to go with maybe not a 1/12 budget, maybe something that's not going to be solid. We just cannot make decisions because we don't know what's going to come back from the federal government. Everything is going to be dependent on them. And I think that many of us are telling the local communities to plan on budgeting anywhere from cuts of 10 to 25% in that range. And if you really want to get lucky, go with 0% increase. And I think the ripple effect is going to be felt with many of the nonprofits out there, you know, whether you're in the human services end of it or whether you're in culture or anything else. I do not see anything coming out of this budget that's going to increase those line items. In fact, there'll probably be cuts from what I understand. And again, it's all with smoke and mirrors right now, because you have to remember too, the state of Massachusetts, like the federal government, the taxes aren't due until July 15th. So they won't get any tax revenue. And usually it's those people that are waiting till the end that owe the state money. So there's probably not going to be a lot of a big increase there, but it looked like they were down right now. I think we're down, somebody else knows this figure probably better than I do, $1.5 billion in revenue that was projected in this year's budget. That's got to be made up. So it's all smoke and mirrors right now. It depends upon, you know, what's going to happen in Washington. It looks like they're going to do something for local communities. It looks like they're going to do something for the states. But then you got Mitch McConnell saying, well, I don't think so. Why should we help them out if they haven't run their government well? So we just don't know. I think that's the best answer right now. But I would think it's not glowing, but you don't know. Adam might know that question more than anybody. He's involved.
No, you nailed it. We were trying to come to some sort of an idea the last couple of weeks, and then we held it off for the federal, because that's the biggest piece. The representative's right. In this fiscal year that ends at the end of June, we're already behind, you know, 800 million to $1 billion, and we're expecting closer to $6 billion for the next year. And so, you know, the best advice that we keep getting is just start with the the Great Recession, and we were cutting to the tune of 20% by line item, and especially local unrestricted local aid, and trying to protect certain social services. But it's scary, and I think one of them, things like earmarks. We're basically already being told, don't expect any earmarks. Again, if you use the Great Recession as an example, in 2008, there were 1,100 earmarks. In 2010, there was 11. And so that's a blow. I mean, you all know as well as anybody that the delegation likes to use those to say, hey, we know our community's best. We're going to direct that money. And our hands might be tied this time.
I think the other thing, just to add quickly, I think it's challenging to compare the Great Recession to what we're going through, because those of us who were there and or have served on local boards, that was kind of done over, those cuts were over like a 2 fiscal year, 3 calendar year process. We've lost about $4.5 billion in the first 4 months of this calendar year. So I think it's hard to compare apples to apples in that regard, but I think Adam's right. There's been deep cuts. It's going to be a challenge. I think our House leadership, and I'm sure the Senate is as well, waiting to see what happens at the federal government, which seems to be dysfunctional on so many levels. So if we're waiting to see what they come up with, we were told at a caucus just this Wednesday that they may be doing 1, if not 2, possibly 3 1/12 budgets. Which is indicative of we don't know yet. And that impact, Stockbridge, the town of Stockbridge has already decided to put off their annual town meeting till August. So I think that's an indicator that they've told the Berkshire Regional School District that we're going on to 1/12 until further notice. I think that's going to be the trend we're going to see more of over the next several weeks.
Yeah, and I think the big thing too is speaking to the audience that we're speaking to today. I do not see absolutely no earmarks are coming out of there. And if you were getting earmarks for support, that's going to be a problem. Your lifeline basically is going to be not because we don't want to do it, because we certainly do. We realize your importance, but our lifeline is going to come from the federal government, and that's what you've got to keep your eye on. And that means getting on Senator Markey, Senator Warren, our congressman, and let them know what your needs are more than anything else, and say, hey, this is what happens if we lose funding. These are the programs that are going to be impacted that you do. I think that's the important thing now, because we are at the will of the federal government now and what they're going to send into the states. They've sent in a tremendous amount already, don't get me wrong, but that's just going to make up those deep losses in tax revenue and things like that in the state.
Thank you. So I want to give each of you just a minute or two to give information, anything that you feel like we haven't covered today that maybe you want nonprofit leaders in the Berkshires to know. Rep Mark, I'll start with you.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here. I didn't hear that.
Just any kind of last minute comments, information that you want nonprofit leaders in the Berkshires to know, anything that you feel like maybe we didn't cover that you wanted to let our leaders know today.
He wanted you to answer all the problems and
I have a 10-point plan for everything. No, thanks. I don't know. And Stevie, you might have noticed I actually got booted off and signed back in recently, so there's been some problems. I just say everyone hang in there. We'll know more hopefully Monday on what this 4-phase approach looks like. I think I talked about it last time we had this call. It was still very new then, so I want to mention it again just in case. Census, I keep talking about the census, and it's important. We're going to have a call, multiple states today on a call to find out a little more information, but the Census Bureau is looking to delay the final deadline for people to respond all the way until Halloween, until October 31st. But regardless, it's important that people in Berkshire County, especially, that we get counted. Our population is already in most towns or cities in decline, in some places in very slow growth, and we can't allow that. We can't allow that number to be unnecessarily exasperated. We need to make sure every person gets counted. It's an issue, obviously, in some places with the internet and with the mail service and with the delay of these field operations. But if people have questions, there's a countywide complete count committee that goes through the BRPC. All of our offices are on this call, the legislative offices. We're all very involved in these efforts. We've all had events in our own districts. So please be in touch with any of us or mine if you so choose, and we will get you the help you need. And please self-respond if you can, and stick together, and we'll all get together soon again, I hope, and we'll know more. Thank you.
Thank you. Tricia, we'll swing it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to all the people who've joined us today. I wish today was a day that we were giving you like some good news and telling you that we have all the answers, and I think that's not really what you heard from us, but instead we're just sort of linking arms with you in wanting to know information and feeling some frustrations. And so, the strength of the Berkshires is that we do stick together well. And so I think we really have to lean into that and to be sharing information with each other, which is why it's so terrific that we have this organization. I think it's a terrific forum for us to be able to share best practices going forward and to really support each other. There's so many needs in this community, and we have to be sure that we are taking care of each other, but we're also taking care of the most vulnerable among us. So I just encourage people to, as Paul said, hang in there, take care of each other, and maybe take a couple of minutes in the next couple of days to take care of yourself. So thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. John, we'll call on you next.
Yes, I'm sitting here thinking about it, how I got back into this game. I thought I was off someplace and in the land of retirement, because I remember back, I was mayor back in 2008 and 9 and 7 when the recession hit back then, and lost $3 million during that time in the city of North Adams's budget. Now back into the middle of this, and knowing that this is even more difficult time for everybody to get through and survive. I can remember saying to Governor Patrick at the time, I said, I don't mind going down with the Titanic, but don't ask me to swim out to it. And that's basically what state government was doing at that time, and not meeting the needs. But I think with the collective experience of this delegation, having been through the trials and tribulations in the past, that we're going to be able to help in ways that others can't. But it's going to be a tough road, because we just don't know what's going to down the road, the uncertainty of it. We're fighting an economic crisis. At the same time, we're fighting a virus that we know nothing about, and there's no cure and there's no real treatment for it out there. So, but I think that we're going to do what we can, and we're going to fight as much as we can. But I wish I could sit here and say things are going to be wonderful, and I can say it too will pass, but we don't just know when it's going to pass. With the best case scenario is we're looking at 18 months, and that's with a vaccine coming into play and the other things. But we have to continue to urge our community members to do those safe things that we have to do so that we can keep the virus under control and be able to move ahead when that sun rises again. Thank you. And to all the people out there, boy, I understand what you're going through and what the needs are, and I think everybody does too. And we do understand that. And not only are we listening to you, we hear you, and you remain in the front line. But my message to you today is to get out there and start a campaign to let the congressmen know, let the 2 United States senators know, and don't be afraid to contact the governor and let him know that we're out here in Western Massachusetts and we'd like representation too. Thank you.
Thank you. Smitty, we'll hear from you next.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of my colleagues seem to be in constant communication, trying to work through these things. I'm still very bullish on the Berkshires, but with every challenges, I think there's new opportunities. I think we're going to be not hearing some good news this afternoon on a major level of the Berkshires, but I think we all collectively, not only on this Zoom call, but businesses in general, I think we need to adjust our expectations. I always looked at, when I was in business many years ago, living in the town of Lenox, Lenox had at that time 6,000 residents. I looked at them as potentially 6,000 customers. I think we need to adjust our expectations, adjust our priorities. I think we need to take a hard look at what staffing we really need. I think we need to take a hard look at our price points, what we are selling and how much we are selling it for. And look at the Berkshires as there's 127,000 customers out there that we could embrace. I used to have an argument when I was a selectman with a local business person in Lenox, and he was always complaining to me that the locals never support me in the dead of winter. And I said, and I won't tell you his name, but I said, the day that you welcome me in July and August is the day I'll be there in January and February. He didn't understand it. He did not understand that. We're in January and February right now, and we need our local people to step up and help us support our restaurants, support our nonprofits. Let's be Berkshire. I keep saying this over and over again because we are a very unique entity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But I think restaurants who have perfected takeout, they will survive because I'm not going to feel that comfortable going back to a restaurant anytime soon. For the restaurants that haven't been open at all, not even attempted to kick the tires on how takeout's going to work, they're going to struggle. I think for retail shops in my district, look at your pricing. The restaurants, I can't afford a $45 entree. I'm sorry. And you shouldn't be selling that either when you can make money at $25. So adjusting our expectations, looking at the Berkshires as a whole, we do stick together during tough times. And I think that will continue. The economy is going to be slow to come back, even if we rip the Band-Aid off tomorrow, which we're not doing. I can't emphasize that enough. We are not opening on Monday. Phase 1 is opening on Monday, and it's a very small phase, a phase that was not legitimately impacted anyways during this shutdown. So keep that in mind. Let's be Berkshire, and we will survive this. If we get another surge, that doctor yesterday who testified with the Congress, it will be the darkest winter in American history. We need to do what we can to avoid that. So let's be smart, use common sense. Let's stay safe and healthy, and let's be Berkshire. And I think we will survive. We'll be better for it in the long run.
Thank you. And Senator Hinds, we'll close with you. And I know that kind of through our conversation, you had mentioned some resources. And so if you could just kind of reiterate those two for folks.
Yeah, we had a legislative call with the secretary who was the co-chair of the Reopening Advisory Board yesterday, and he said, I think it was yesterday, he said that, just because we'll allow industries to open on a certain date, it doesn't mean they have to. And that's kind of it's an unfortunate response given what you've heard today, that we're not getting more clarity and advance notice. They're building in this on-ramp in their own calculations without communicating. But so I think we should all look at it that way too. We have to be clear that we're feeling safe when we open as an industry, as an individual business or institution. So I just want to make that point. The thing that's really on my mind is there is going to be a serious need for regional communication, and that's why I thank you for convening this conversation. But we talked about the resources of the boards of health, bulk purchasing of PPE. The state is not going to be purchasing PPE and making it available. They're going to put on a website a list of vendors that are approved. And so what do the Berkshires do about that to make sure that as we move out of the medical space, we have reliable access to PPE? And there's one conversation after another. The jobs, Representative Barrett pointing out the unemployment rates, a lot of that is concentrated in under $40,000 jobs. And so what are we doing as a county to make sure that folks, as there's shifts happening in the economy, can find other employment? And the shifts are huge. The UBS came out with a report that showed that 100,000 retail stores are going to close because of this countrywide. 20,000 closed in the Great Recession. Retail sales are down 16.4%. By the way, that was April. In March, they were down 8.9, and that was the largest decline in 1 month in the history of our country. So 16.4. There's a shift happening in the economy, in our daily life. And I'm going to end on a happy note here, that I think the Berkshires are well placed to take advantage of that. If we're seeing a deurbanization, if we're seeing a shift to online, remote working, and having a quality of life with outdoor recreation and cultural institutions we all love, we can maybe turn the corner on some serious trends that we were worried about before COVID, declining population and the like, in a shifting economy. So we can get there, but boy, oh boy, is the short-term fallout that everyone on this call will be dealing with is going to be a rough road. But that said, I feel like in the future, we might come out stronger.
Thank you. And before we go, I just want to remind everyone that the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires is having its awards and 2-day virtual summit on May 19th and 20th with workshops, panel discussions, awards, live and recorded interviews, and more. So you can head over to npcberkshires.org to purchase your ticket. And as the Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires, we're going to continue to keep the dialogue open with the Berkshire Delegation and all of our members. We covered a lot today, but we know that we couldn't get to all of your questions, but we hope that you're walking away with some good information. A huge thank you to the Berkshire Delegation for joining us again today. We were together a month ago, and you all made time in your schedules to join us once again, so thank you. And thank you for continuing to advocate for us. Thank you to our Nonprofit Center of the Berkshires members. And thank you to my co-moderator, Ilene, for checking the chat today and posing some of those questions to our delegation. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. Be safe, be well, be Berkshire, as Smitty said, and have a great weekend. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.